What's up, everybody? Pastor JD here, coming to you with hopefully a quick training on how to lead a digital North City community. I'm so pumped for you all. Thank you for jumping in, saying yes to being leaders of these digital North City communities. It's an exciting time for our church. I've been joking with other people that I've been talking about, like leaders always are talking about going big. Well, this is a phase for our church to go small. And I think there's a real beauty in us experiencing closer connection with each other, to experience closer connection with God and closer connection, hopefully with our neighbors, to be empowered in mission. That's what these are all about. So I've got some quick training that just will get your mind around what digital North City communities are and how to launch one. Some key decisions that you and whoever you're leading this with have to make. So let's jump into it. Bear with me here. I'm going to pull up something in screen share, and then hopefully you should be able to see this. So how do you craft a digital North City community? So like I said from the get-go, this is founded on, all these North City communities are founded on us having micro expressions of loving God, each other, and our neighbors in the way of Jesus together. That's the vision for what these are. And we need these sort of spaces, particularly in the pandemic, but even before the pandemic, each of us sort of, I think, in our own ways, long for these sort of spaces to do that. So I'm excited for them to start. Here are some, I think, key elements. I'm sure there's other key elements of these North City communities. I'm sure there are some that you will discover as you launch these, but here are some important ones that are proven to consider as you're thinking about launching this, as you're thinking about communicating with the people in your North City community, as I'm helping to coach you along in leading and hosting these. The first one is predictable patterns. So this is a principle that's been around a long time for these forms of groups, whether you want to call them micro churches, missional communities, whatever you want to call them. We're calling them North City communities. But a predictable pattern is basically describing the concept that people have more courage and capacity to step into spaces like this that might be new for them if there's less mystery with it, if there's some predictable rhythm of gathering, and they will first have the courage to step in and definitely have the endurance to keep forging community with you in these spaces. So what that means for you as leaders and hosts is defining the rhythm, defining of the when, the where of this, and to try to make that as consistent as possible. And the digital aspect of this sort of makes this a little bit simpler than maybe an in-person one. We're encouraging you to use the Zoom platform. Please let us know if that is not something that's available to you. You're welcome to explore other platforms of connecting over video conference. I'm open to you trying something different. If you hear from your crew after you start that there's a tool that they like better, go for it. So that's the where. It's online digitally. And the when is, we've been encouraging groups to try to meet during the 6 p.m. time frame that our gatherings are shifting to, for the sake of predictable patterns. Not all our North Cities communities are doing that, because some of them fulfilling their mission makes sense for them to gather otherwise. But the more consistency they can be in someone's calendar to say, hey, I'm going to participate in a macro or micro way with North City at this time frame, the better. Doesn't mean that you can't deviate on your Sundays. I'll explain a little bit how we're empowering you to be able to do that. But consistency. Another level of predictability is just what people are going to experience in the particular Sunday. So you already know that North City in general, as a network of smaller communities, is now going to inhabit this rhythm of every other week being in macro or large group gatherings that are streamed online or in the park, and then micro gatherings. So you're talking about every other week for these micro gatherings, these North City communities. But in that every other week pattern, you're going back and forth between a pattern of what you're focusing on as you're gathering together. So defining how you tackle those elements, which I'll explain in a little bit, and being able to communicate that to your group will give them confidence with this predictable pattern, and then try to stick to it as best as you can. The second concept, lightweight and low maintenance. this is a factor with more in-person ones, but I just wanted to put this here as well because we want this to be as simple as possible for you to step into and to host. So try basically in the digital context, this would be keeping the tech as simple as possible, trying to not add a lot of complication into it. So use this as a guidepost as you're making decisions. The third one that I think is really crucial at the beginning stages of these, communication is everything. So early on, finding the best communication channel so that everybody who's a part of your North City community knows what they need to know when they need to know it. So some great suggestions, obviously emails, kind of the cornerstone one, getting everybody on an email chain. Has some disadvantages because it's not that interactive, but that's probably the highest participation we see at North City, people with their emails. We're encouraging North City communities to consider starting Facebook groups. If everybody in their group is a part of Facebook and readily uses that, they offer some great tools, and there's a way to connect those groups to our broader network of groups that kind of are under the umbrella of our page. That also provides a platform for digital gatherings. So you could use a Facebook room. I haven't really used those yet, but you could see how that would work for you all. So those are the two channels we recommend to you. If you've got better ways of staying connected, some groups I know are going to try to experiment with Marco Polo just to stay relationally connected. Not a great channel for announcements or anything like that, but decide on a primary communication channel and stick with it so people know how to find the information. Last thing I'll mention about communication is we will provide a group within CCB, which is our database that doesn't have great functionality for communication, but it does work. That's how a lot of our discipleship tables communicate. That's available to you as well, but that's more just for you having people's contact information. Rhythm. One last thing I'll say about communication is this is small enough groups where you could have people on a text conversation just as reminders and really important communications. But let's talk about rhythm. So this is double clicking a little bit on predictable patterns. As I said, you'll have two different kinds of gatherings when you gather in that every other week rhythm. And I've got them split up here in that statement I read earlier, loving God, each other, and our neighbors in the way of Jesus. They're kind of split up across those. If you're familiar with missional community training, some of you may be, this uses the language of up, in, and out pattern. So the first Sunday, and this is what you'll be focused on August 9th when you launch. If you're watching this later, whenever you have your first time, it's good to start with a focus on loving God together. So that's 1 week focused on connecting with God and each other. So those are your two focuses for that week. Then you'll oscillate to being focused on loving your neighbors. So you still connect with each other and do that together. But the focus will be less on like reading scripture together or worshiping together or praying together. And it'll be more maybe a focused discussion on what it actually looks like for you to love your neighbors in this season. So let's go a little bit further. And here I've come up with kind of two templates for you to think about how to craft each of these times. And I'm giving this to you as something you could just take and run with and say, this is our template. Or you could take kind of the principles and the cornerstones of it and move it around, shake it up, however you would like. So I've got these designed so that each gathering is about the same length as what used to be a full length of a North City worship gathering. So we're talking about 75 minutes that we're working with here. And there's 4 key elements that would be a win if you accomplish these in the time you have. And I've kind of laid them out as a kind of roadmap for how you might spend time on each of them. Let me explain them in each segment here. So this connecting with each other. So this is real simple. I've used the example in the digital communities one. We used to have these coffee and connection times before our online gathering. Those are great. People had their coffee. They would, their kids would be running by, say hi to the other kids. My kids, Rosie and Daniel, would say hi to other people's kids on the Zoom calls. We want that. We think that's great. We think that's wonderful. One iteration of planning this out is, say your community decides together a little bit before, say, the live content goes out at 6 p.m. on the Facebook page. Maybe you plan to watch that together, so you connect beforehand. If you plan to access the content outside of that time, I'll talk about that in a little bit. You could meet whenever is convenient for you and just start the time by as people are jumping on the Zoom call or however you're connecting. Maybe you have a community time question for that week where it's like, hey, what's your favorite movie genre? That was the question this last week. This is the space for this. Hey, how are you doing? Let's connect authentically. So about 15 minutes, create some time for that. And then here's the big chunk of it. North City Online. So we will have an online presence every week on our Facebook page. We will premiere some content, and that content on the Sundays that you're gathering for these Loving God Together weeks will be focused on setting you all up to have a conversation about a particular text. So it's almost like an extensive dwelling in the word prompt. This will include potentially 1 or 2 worship songs and announcements about the broader North City community. So as I alluded to earlier, this will go live on our Facebook page at 6 p.m. on those Sundays, but it will also be available on YouTube as soon as Thursday that week. So there's a couple options that are available to you because of that. You could start a Zoom call, and then as a presenter, just bring that YouTube link up and press play or begin. Or maybe you decide later on that you don't want to participate in worship. You just want the dwelling in the word prompt. You don't need announcements for whatever reason. You can truncate what amount of content you actually use to prompt your discussion. So we're going to put the power in your hands essentially to either chime in with us at 6 p.m. live on our Facebook page, which you can either do through the Zoom call itself by sharing your screen. Everybody will be able to hear it, or you could disband and say, see you online, and then jump back in the Zoom call after you're done. Whatever you guys think is simplest, whatever you think is lightweight, low maintenance, whatever works for your crew tech-wise, do it. That's what's most important. We're going to put the content in a couple different places to make it easy for you. So the whole idea is this sets you up for a group discussion. So then you'll need somehow to either stay in that Zoom call or stay in that Zoom call or start a Zoom call to have a group discussion. And then you as a facilitator are welcoming people in. And this group discussion is based on kind of the dwelling in the word principle, where if you're not familiar with dwelling in the word, there will be a training coming out this week on that, so you're equipped to lead it in your context. But simply there's some questions that you're asking about the text that's read or presented in the prompt. And those are: what stuck out to you? What questions do you have? What do you think God is saying to you or to our North City community or to our broader North City church? Any of those are fair game. And then each week there will be a unique question from the communicator about something that's maybe more applicable to the text. So for instance, if it's we're talking about the Good Samaritan story, like we could ask who is a Good Samaritan in your life, or how have you seen that play out? That sort of thing may be more contextualized for the week. But basically you got 15 to 20 minutes here to create a context for discussion of those questions. Again, I'm coming out with a training that will give you some tips about how to keep that going along. But just real practically, we've found that the best conversations happen with 6 people or less. So that's not 6 screens, that's 6 people or less can have a conversation together in a timely manner and be able to feel like they've shared and were heard. So if you get to be beyond that, or even if you find it better to get in deeper conversations, I would shift to going into triads. And then you're actually using a tool in Zoom in particular called a breakout session. So you're breaking groups out and you're deciding to come back at a particular time. And that might be worth your while so that people have more sharing time, more listening time, that sort of thing. But all of that's happening within a 20-minute. Remember, you'll be queued up, ready to go from the prompt content itself to go right into that and say, okay, guys, let's start a discussions. Let's do it this way. So jumping over to the last component that's essential in these gatherings. And I'll just remind you again, this is a template. So you guys can innovate. If, say, for instance, you want to spend more time praying for each other, or some way of connecting, or one of you brings a piece of scripture that was really important to you. Like, I want you to innovate to create the experience that's life-giving to your group. So this is just a template. The last component is communication and announcements. Like I said here, 2 minutes, it doesn't need to be that long. This is just hey, here's what we need to know for the next time we're together. Here's what we need to know if we're planning something, or if someone's working on something, this is what you need to know. I would encourage you the first time to have some sort of calendar that you're able to share electronically with people for that predictable pattern thing. Okay, let's move on here. So the second, this is not loading great. Images, that's funny. The second component, so you're moving in this rhythm of loving God together and then loving your neighbors together. So obviously in a digital North City community context, all of you are going to be in separate spaces. Maybe you'll have some geographical connection, but the most connection you'll have is a relational connection and connection to North City. So your community is inherently going to be more of a, let's say, a community of missionaries than a missionary community. Let me explain that. It means individually, you'll all be discerning what it means for you to love your neighbors in the way of Jesus. So these weeks may be focused more on equipping and empowering each other through conversation and accountability in conversations that just help you conceptualize what it means for you this next few weeks to love your neighbor in the way of Jesus. Now, that being said, you could forge a digital community that is focused on a particular issue if all the people in that group are passionate about a particular thing, say inequity or something like that, or education or young children. Then you could have conversations about how you're partnering with an organization or how you're responding to that. But most of the times it's going to be each of you individually discerning who your neighbor is and how you're loving them in the way of Jesus. So this just means it will be very similarly structured as your first, as the one we just went through. So I'm just going to hop back. Now this says week 1 template, but imagine this for week 2. You still have components of connecting with each other. I want to be clear that there still will be online content even. And let me just jump back to this slide. We were hoping to create that online content, not necessarily as a sermon, but maybe as a 10-minute, 15-minute piece of equipping content that's maybe like the art of neighboring in the time of COVID, or some asset-based community development, or some sort of teaching that enables you as someone who's trying to love their neighbor in the way of Jesus to do that better. Or it might just be simply like, hey, let's create a map of your neighborhood so that you can pray for your neighbors this week. And then we would set you up, we, the communicator in that prompt, that video content, would set you up to then go into your groups and have some sort of discussion or activity that you do in that regard. So we're thinking through those things, and we will, at least for the next 2 months here, have content ready for you to just press play on or just tune into that then sets you up for discussion or working together on that thing. So let me jump back to this template and say, so then your group discussion would be focused on actually doing that in the midst of your group. An example might be, we just say, hey, why don't you just pause and pray for your neighbors? You break up in triads and then just pray for the neighbors that come to mind, that sort of deal. And then also you'd have a component of communication and announcements as well. So those are the 2 templates. Like I said, every other rhythm. So here's some next steps that you need to take as leaders to talk about this as hosts. They're pretty simple action steps, but I just wanted to lay them out pretty plainly for you here. So some of these would be really good to take before you gather first. Some of these will have to be determined by some discernment in your group, but can happen in the midst of maybe your first month. The first one, create a rhythm. That's those predictable patterns. You need to decide on a time. How are people connecting? And then make those as consistent as possible. That also means deciding on a flow. You can just take the template I've given you today, run with it, or tweak it however you'd like to make it your own, to make it probably more fun for your people. Another one is invite people in. So that's a great next step. And I really want to broaden your all's imagination and encourage you to broaden the people who are a part of your community's imagination on this. Maybe not for the first one, but if you've got people in your mind who are sort of disconnected with church or community, or they've lost touch in this time of COVID, this is an awesome opportunity to say, hey, we're connecting in this really unique way digitally. Why don't you just come and hang out on this Zoom call with us and see what you think? These are people who are a part of our North City community that are kind of fun, and it'd be kind of fun for you to get to know them. Invite people. And this is a great thing to encourage people in your North City community to do as well. And try to make those Zoom calls as accessible as can be. It should be good to have a password on them, but like a friend could find out that password and invite a friend. Another one, create a calendar. I mentioned this. pretty straightforward. It'd be good to some electronic way transmit, hey, this is what the next month or two look like for us, just so everybody can mark their calendar, even if it's as simple as this is when we're jumping on a Zoom call. Here's the Zoom link. Here are the Sundays to put in your calendar for us connecting over Zoom, and here's when. Pick a communication channel. I talked about that earlier, whether it's email or connect on Facebook. If you're going to use Facebook, create the group. I'll help you connect it to the North City page, but get that in place. And maybe your first Zoom call, you can say, hey, does everybody respond best to email, text? What's the best thing for us to communicate in? So there it is. My commitment to you is I'm really going to try hard to get you the equipping you need. We're going to be checking in every 2 weeks or so just to say, hey, how did they go? How's it going? Are people engaging with it? Do you need to tweak it at all? Any problems you come across, we are here to help you navigate. So thanks for watching this training. I'm so pumped for you guys. We'll be in constant communication here for the next few weeks until these things are launched. Peace.